When I saw the dark furred bear standing over my wife's grave, my breath seized in my chest, because I understood, this was no accident. It had been 1 full year since Martha's funeral. 42 years of marriage ended beneath that slab of granite, and I had not found the courage to return until today. The old cemetery sits a few miles outside Asheville, tucked between a sagging iron fence and a wall of oaks that lean toward the Blue Ridge like silent guardians. We chose it for its quiet. I never dreamed the quiet would feel so loud. Late October had painted the place with bronze and copper. Damp leaves clung to my boots as I crossed the uneven ground, carrying a bundle of dried lavender, her favorite scent. The air tasted of wood smoke and rain-soaked earth. I told myself I would lay the flowers, whisper a prayer, and leave before dusk swallowed the path. Then I saw movement. A shadow heavier than twilight gliding near her stone. My first thought was vandal. Then a stray dog. Maybe a coyote scavenging. I tightened my fists and stepped closer. The shape straightened. A bear. A black bear with a rust-brown sheen, broad through the shoulders, tall as a man when it rose. It stood perfectly still at the head of Martha's grave, as though placed there by some unseen hand. Every instinct screamed run. Quietly. Now. Yet my legs refused. I was anchored by something I couldn't name, fear, yes, but also the dizzy certainty that I was witnessing something I wasn't meant to interrupt. The bear didn't growl, didn't huff, didn't sway. Its muzzle pointed down at the stone, not at me. No birds called. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I forced one step backward. Wet leaves crackled. The bear's ear twitched, yet it stayed. Another step. Nothing. Then, slowly, deliberately, it lifted a paw and brushed aside the layer of leaves that had settled against the base of the grave. No claws raked the dirt. It was a careful sweep, almost gentle, as though clearing a window so it could read the name engraved there. My throat tightened. God. In that moment the fear loosened. What replaced it felt like standing in a church alone at midnight, uninvited, but humbled into silence. A memory flickered. 2 summers before Martha died we'd lived deeper in the foothills. She used to leave bruised apples at the tree line, for the girl in the woods, as she called a young female bear that wandered close at dusk. They remember kindness, she would say, stroking the air where the bear had been. I had laughed then. Now the laughter died on my tongue. This could not be that same bear. The mountains are wide, seasons change, animals move on. And yet. I tried to speak, but only a rasp emerged. The bear turned its head slightly, and for one heartbeat its eyes met mine, dark, unreadable, and utterly calm. Time twisted. I might have stood there a minute. Or 10. The chill seeped through my jacket, but I barely felt it. Then, with the same slow grace, the bear lowered itself beside the grave. It folded its legs, pressed its great head to its paws, and closed its eyes. A living sentinel. A mourner. Something inside me shattered. I set the lavender gently at the foot of the stone. My hands trembled so hard the stems rattled. I whispered, "Martha, is this your doing?" The bear lay motionless. I backed away, not daring to turn my back until I reached the curve of the path. Just before the trees swallowed my view, I glanced over my shoulder. The bear still rested there, a dark statue in the fading light. I should have run, should have called the rangers, should have done anything but stand frozen in awe, but I felt held by an invisible thread, a reminder that the wild does not always come to harm us. Sometimes it comes to say something we have forgotten how to hear. Finally, the spell broke. I stumbled to my truck, nerves buzzing, heart thundering, lungs aching for air I hadn't realized I'd been denying myself. The engine started on the third try, my hands shook so badly I could barely fit the key. I told myself it was over, just a strange, terrifying, beautiful accident. Bears roam, graves attract smells, coincidence writes the eeriest stories. I almost believed that. But as I pulled onto the gravel road, a single thought struck me like cold water. I was ready to flee, yet something inside me had stopped. Because the bear. It hadn't moved. It simply stood there. Like a guardian. I thought that was the end of it. I thought nothing could follow a moment so impossible. If only I'd known what lay waiting beyond tomorrow's sunrise. I would have turned back then and there. Because nature was not finished speaking. Not by a long shot. Dawn came restless. I'd lain awake replaying the image of that bear beside Martha's stone until the darkness thinned and the forest began whispering with birdsong. Logic insisted I stay away, call the rangers, let professionals handle a wild animal haunting a graveyard. But something deeper, something that sounded like Martha's quiet laughter, pulled me back. I parked in the same hollow, heart hammering like I was about to break into my own memories. The cemetery looked unchanged, moss-slick stones, amber leaves, the slow drift of mountain mist. Yet every nerve braced for movement. There, by the granite marker with Martha's name, stood the bear. It faced the stone, not me. Head lowered, shoulders rising and falling with calm breaths. No growl, no huff, no posture of dominance. Just a vast, living shape breathing the chill October air. Instinct said make noise, wave arms, drive it off. My hand found a fist-sized rock near the path. I hefted it, ready to shout. One step closer. The bear's ear flicked. It didn't turn. Instead, it leaned forward and, with startling delicacy, nudged a mat of wet leaves aside. The sweep of its paw was slow, almost tender, as though it feared scratching the stone. When the marble letters shone clean, the bear sniffed them once, twice, deep, mournful breaths that sounded dangerously like sorrow. My arm sagged. The rock felt ridiculous in my palm. Minutes stretched. A crow cawed in the distance, the bear gave no sign it even heard. Then, with the same solemn care, it folded its legs and settled on the ground. Front paws crossed, muzzle resting, eyes half-lidded, a creature at vigil. I stared, throat thick. It's grieving, I murmured, voice barely sound. God help me, it's grieving. That memory slammed back, the summer evenings when a young female bear ambled to our apple tree. Martha would meet her at the porch edge, tossing bruised fruit with a gentle underhand that made me fear she'd lose a finger. She's polite, Martha insisted. See the way she waits? She understands kindness. I had rolled my eyes, eager to protect both wife and property. But Martha was stubborn. Night after night, the bear returned until August heat broke and acorns ripened, and then we saw her no more. Standing there now, I felt time swirl. Same copper streak in the fur. Same measured calm. Could a bear remember across distance and seasons? Science would shrug. Martha would nod yes, of course. I whispered, is it you, girl in the woods? The bear's eyes closed, as if in answer, or maybe just in peace. I set the rock on the ground. A breeze shifted leaves around my boots, the forest smelled of damp pine needles and distant wood smoke. I edged a little nearer, slow enough to feel every heartbeat. 10 paces. 8. 5. The bear lifted its head but didn't rise. Its gaze met mine, dark, steady, the way a parent looks at a child who finally understands a lesson. I wanted to speak but words tangled behind a knot of grief. I managed, "She loved you, you know that?" No reaction, yet somehow I sensed the message landed. Another gust scattered leaves across the cemetery, rattling brittle stems like applause too shy to commit. The bear watched one swirling clump settle against the base of another headstone, then rested its chin again. The whole world seemed to hush around that gentle gesture. Time loosened. I don't recall how long we shared that silence, 5 minutes, 15. The sun climbed, burning mist off marble faces. Somewhere behind me a squirrel scolded from a branch, but I couldn't move. It felt wrong to disturb whatever bond lay humming between this creature and the woman I'd loved. Finally the bear shifted, rising with slow dignity. Muscles rippled under its coat, dew rolled off its flanks. It gave one last soft sniff at the stone, then turned into the trees. No rush. No fear. It disappeared like smoke through a curtain of rhododendron, and the forest swallowed the sound of its footfalls. I stood alone, legs trembling with the echo of something bigger than understanding. I reached down and brushed away the leaves the bear had missed. My fingers traced Martha's name, cold letters warm with memory. I thought that was it, that the stranger would wander off, and the mystery would fade with the morning light. I'd witnessed a kindness, nothing more, and life would slip back to ordinary pain. But a whisper inside warned me, pay attention. Because the wild doesn't visit twice without reason. And the story we think is ending may only be clearing its throat. I believed the bear was gone for good. I believed the miracle had shown itself and lifted the veil. I had no idea it was only opening the door. I barely slept, yet dawn found me already winding back up the mountain road, headlights cutting silver blades through lingering mist. Yesterday's silence had pierced me too deep to leave questions unanswered. I needed to know if the bear would return, or if what I'd witnessed would dissolve like a dream tasted only once. The truck shuddered to a stop beneath the same bowed hemlocks. I killed the engine, listened. A woodpecker hammered somewhere beyond sight, a far-off dog barked twice and fell silent. I stepped onto the frosted gravel and felt my pulse steady, not calm, exactly, but ready. No rock in my fist this time. I crossed the gate, boots brushing wet leaves. My breath ghosted ahead of me. Through the thinning fog I saw Martha's headstone, and there, as though she had never left, stood the bear. She faced me now, broad body outlined against the stone. A shimmer of morning light traced amber along her shoulders. The old terror fluttered in my belly, but it was no longer a fist, it was a trembling wing. I took 3 slow paces forward. She lifted her head. Those eyes, dark, depthless, but not blank. They carried a weight that pinned my feet and loosened my chest all at once. A feeling bloomed so raw it hurt, recognition that couldn't be named. In her eyes there was something I cannot explain. Not rage. Not fear. Something more. I spoke without thinking, voice rough as gravel. "Morning, girl." The sound seemed absurdly small between us. Her ears flicked, but she neither growled nor shifted. Instead she breathed, one long, even exhale that plumed like smoke in the cold. I took another step. My boots rustled leaves, she remained still. I was close enough now to see a faint scar beneath her left eye, thin as a thread, silver against dark fur. Memory stabbed, that cub from years ago had snagged her face on barbed wire near our orchard fence. Martha had worried the cut would blind her. "We should help," she'd pleaded. We never managed more than fresh apples and whispered apologies into the dusk, but the bear had healed. Here was the proof. I lowered myself to the ground, heart thundering. Damp earth chilled through my jeans. We were 10 feet apart, nothing between us but my wife's name carved in stone. Words spilled, clumsy, sincere. "I miss her," I said. "She believed you understood." "I never did. Not until yesterday." The bear's nostrils twitched. She shifted weight, not forward, not back, just settling, as though to listen better. I told her about the empty house, about the lavender scent that still lingered in Martha's closet, about how silence can feel heavier than grief. I talked because the forest itself seemed to lean in, and the bear's calm was permission. Wind rattled oak branches overhead. Somewhere a jay screeched. Inside me, fear melted into wonder, and wonder into something gentler, something like comfort. My vision blurred, I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, ashamed and unashamed all at once. Minutes passed. Maybe more. She blinked slowly, and I mirrored the motion, feeling ridiculous and impossibly alive. The world felt small, knitted tight by shared breath. Finally, she lifted her nose, tasting the air. A breeze carried the scent of wood smoke from a distant cabin. She looked toward the tree line, then back at me. We held each other's gaze, two creatures bound by a grief neither could voice. Then, quiet as mist parting, she turned. Powerful shoulders rolled, pads pressed soft earth. She walked behind the headstone, paused as if to acknowledge Martha once more, and stepped into the forest. Branches closed after her like curtains. No cracking twigs, no crashing brush, only silence. I kept sitting, stunned by the gentle finality of her exit. Part of me wanted to call out, beg her to stay, but the larger part understood, her leaving was the gift. I whispered, "Thank you," to the empty path. I thought that was goodbye. A perfect, impossible farewell. The kind of moment you fold into your chest and protect for the rest of your life. Surely nature had said all it meant to say. I rose, stiff and light-headed. Before leaving, I laid 3 fresh apples at the foot of the stone, an offering, or maybe just a promise to keep listening. Then I walked to the truck through sunlight that felt suddenly warmer. All day the memory glowed in me like an ember. I didn't tell anyone, some things shrink under ordinary words. That night, for the first time since Martha died, I slept deep and unbroken. I believed the bear had finished her vigil, and peace, strange, fragile peace, settled over me like new snow. I was wrong. Because the next morning, something happened that shattered every rule of the world I thought I knew, something so startling it flung me out of reality and into a story I never asked to witness. I had walked through grief into wonder, what waited now was beyond either. And all because a creature from the wild refused to let me drift back to ordinary life. I woke before dawn, apples on my mind. 3 bright red ones from the old tree behind the house, last of the season, still cool with night air. Martha used to call them our little rubies. If the bear truly was her long-ago visitor, then apples felt like speaking her language. Fog clung to the road, turning headlights into white walls. My palm sweated on the steering wheel, but the flutter of dread was gone. What stirred now felt strangely like anticipation, the way I once felt before seeing Martha step through an arrival gate. The cemetery emerged gray and silent. No sign of movement among the stones. I crunched across frost-brittle leaves and knelt beside Martha's marker. "For you," I whispered, arranging the apples in a neat line like candles on a birthday cake no one was here to celebrate. I waited. Minutes ticked. My breath drifted and vanished. Was I a fool, laying fruit at a grave for a wild animal that might never return? The doubt stung, but deeper still lay a quiet conviction: she would come. And then, there. A rustle beyond the maples, the soft thud of padded feet. The bear stepped from the tree line, dark coat shining with mist. She paused, sniffing the air, eyes locking on me. I remained still, a respectful statue. She approached with measured strides, each paw settling as gently as a cat's. When she reached the apples, she lowered her head, nostrils flaring. One deep inhale, then another. She nudged the first apple with her nose, but instead of eating, she rolled it across the stone until it rested against the engraved letters of Martha's name. The second apple received the same careful push. The third. Only then did she lower herself beside the grave, limbs folding with deliberate grace. She sat upright, almost symmetrical to where I knelt, the apples perfectly divided, 2 on her side of the stone, 1 on mine, as though we were sharing a meal with the woman who once fed us both. I felt something inside me crack, the invisible shield that had kept grief from drowning me outright. My throat closed, hot tears blurred the world. "You remember her," I choked. "My God, you really do." A breeze fluttered the thinning canopy, sunlight dappled the bear's coat. She blinked, slow and solemn. No hunger brightened her gaze. This was not about food. This was ceremony. Martha's voice echoed in memory: "These animals feel more than we think." I had smiled politely when she said that, eager to believe people were the special ones. Now I saw how small that assumption was. I spoke again, words ragged but unstoppable. "She was kindness itself. She believed in your wisdom. I wish I'd believed sooner." My tears dripped onto my hands. "I miss her so much." The bear's ears tilted forward, not startled, not wary. Listening. I kept talking, telling stories of porch swings and summer thunderstorms, of Martha's laugh when a hummingbird nearly tangled in her hair, of how she saved every bruised apple for the girl out back. I told the bear things I hadn't told another soul, how I feared growing smaller without my wife, how the house echoed with her absence, how I sometimes spoke aloud just to hear a voice. And in that impossible quiet I felt, truly felt, the bear's presence soaking up each syllable like earth drinks rain. It didn't matter whether she understood English, or memory, or death. What mattered was that she stayed. I spoke to the bear as if I were speaking to Martha. And the bear listened. It didn't run. And, heaven help me, it felt as though it understood. The weight of months collapsed. I wept openly, breaths hitching. Not the wrenching, hollow cries of fresh loss, these tears carried release, the way a river swells then finally breaks its dam. When the storm inside me calmed, I realized the bear had shifted. She lay stretched alongside the grave now, head down, eyes half closed, mirroring the posture of yesterday, guarding or perhaps resting in the comfort of shared sorrow. I wiped my face and managed a shaky laugh. "We make a strange pair, don't we?" My voice sounded lighter, the words buoyed by something like gratitude. The bear rose, muscles rolling beneath her coat. She nudged the lone apple on my side back toward the others, collecting the trio against the stone, then turned toward the forest. Mid-step, she paused and looked over her shoulder. For one heartbeat I felt Martha gazing at me through that dark, steady eye. "Thank you," I breathed. She slipped into the trees, branches whispering in her wake, and the clearing exhaled. I stayed a long while, tracing the cold granite letters, fingers sticky with tear salt and apple scent. Somewhere between those sobs and that soft retreat, a truth settled in my chest like a new heartbeat: grief can be shared, even across species, even across worlds we pretend don't touch. As the sun climbed, a stubborn ray glinted off the apples, turning their red skins golden. I smiled, unexpected and real. I thought the miracle had spoken its final word. I thought nothing could surpass a bear dividing her gift with the dead. But nature was still composing its sentence, and the next clause would rewrite everything I believed about memory, about loyalty, about the living bond between spirit and flesh. On the fourth morning I turned onto the cemetery lane and saw a silver sedan already parked by the gate, trunk open, a man kneeling by a marble cross. I hesitated. This place had felt like mine and the bear's alone. But grief is communal ground. I walked in quietly, bouquet of pine boughs in hand. That was when I heard the shout. "Hey! Get out of there!" A woman's voice, sharp with panic. She stood 20 yards ahead, phone raised like a weapon. I followed her gaze, and my stomach lurched. The bear was back, lumbering between headstones, heading straight for Martha's plot. Calm as ever, but size alone was threat enough to strangers. The kneeling man scrambled to his feet, eyes wild. "It's okay," I called, quickening my pace. "She's not dangerous." The woman didn't lower her phone. "Are you crazy? That's a black bear." Her thumb stabbed the screen. "I'm calling 911. "Please," I said, "don't." "She's just," my words tangled. How do you explain vigil and kindness to someone shivering behind a tombstone? I tried anyway. "She's been coming here because of my wife. My wife fed her years ago. She's mourning." Their faces registered disbelief, then fear. The man backed toward the gate. Sirens already echoed faintly, rising through the valley like approaching thunder. I pivoted toward the bear. She'd reached Martha's stone, nose brushing the apple's dried skins. One remained uneaten, wrinkled but whole. She sniffed, nudged it in a slow semicircle, still sharing. Blue lights splashed across the tree trunks. 2 sheriff's cruisers clattered up the path, followed by a forestry service truck with a metal cage bolted in back. Doors slammed, boots crunched gravel. A ranger in green stepped forward, tranquilizer rifle cradled. "Sir, move away from the animal. She won't hurt anyone," I pled. "Please give her a minute." The ranger's jaw tightened. Bears in human spaces get habituated. That's when attacks happen. We can't take that risk. Habituated. The word felt sterile, surgical, nothing like what was happening. "She's here for a reason. Let me show you." I knelt, palm up, inches from her massive paw. "Girl," I whispered, "easy." The bear looked at me, eyes soft, question in their depth, then back at the ranger. She did not charge, growl, or even huff. Her only crime was existing where human fear said she shouldn't. Behind me someone muttered, "Just shoot the dart already." Another voice urged caution. Radios crackled with protocol. I rose, placed myself between rifle and bear. "You dart her, she'll wake in an unfamiliar forest, alone, miles away. She'll come back or she'll starve trying. And if you fail to relocate, you'll label her aggressive and end her. For what? Because she remembers kindness?" The ranger's eyes flicked to the onlookers, public safety balanced against one grieving old man. He took a step closer, voice low. "Sir, please. I admire your compassion, but I have a job." "So do I," I said, surprised by the steel in my voice. "My job is to honor my wife. This bear is part of that." Silence stretched. Finally the ranger lowered the muzzle a fraction. We'll give her space for now, but if she doesn't leave by nightfall, we'll have to act. Nightfall. A deadline written in daylight. They backed their vehicles beyond the gate yet stayed parked, engines idling like impatient wolves. The visitors drove off, relief in their taillights. I remained. Hours passed. The bear lay beside the stone, head on paws, as though the earlier chaos never happened. I sat against an angel statue 10 feet away. Afternoon slipped toward dusk, wind combed the grass in hushed sweeps. Each time a cruiser crept closer I rose, standing sentinel. The bear would lift her head, meet my gaze, then rest again. At sundown the ranger approached. We're clearing out for the night, but we'll be back at first light. If she's still here, we tranquilize. He studied my face. You should go home. I'm staying. You can't stay in a graveyard after dark. Watch me. He exhaled through his nose, half frustration, half respect, then turned to his truck. The convoy rolled away, red taillights fading like embers. I fetched a blanket and thermos from my pickup and settled in the driver's seat, windows cracked to hear the night. The cemetery lay in moon-washed silver. Somewhere, an owl questioned the darkness. The bear's silhouette rested by Martha, a shadow embracing a shadow. Sleep came fitful, shredded by worry that flashing lights would return, that a dart would thunk into fur, that a miracle would be caged and hauled away while I watched, powerless. Just before dawn a distant engine rumbled down the lane. My heart plummeted, I'd failed her. But as headlights swept across the stones, the space beside Martha's grave lay empty. No dark bulk, no ripple of breathing fur. Only 3 shriveled apples and a smear of flattened leaves. I stepped into the cold dawn, scanning the treeline. Nothing. I thought the wonder nature had lent me was gone forever, snatched back by fear and sirens. I thought daylight would find only emptiness and regret. Yet the forest was merely holding its breath. Because at that fragile edge of morning, it still had one more secret to let slip, and when it did, the world I trusted would turn inside out. Dawn bled into the cemetery like watercolor, soft gray seeping over stone. I'd hardly slept, slumped behind the wheel, waiting for engines and tranquilizer guns. But when the eastern ridge blushed pink and no convoy appeared, I climbed out, stiff-legged, heart drumming with equal parts relief and dread. The grass glittered with frost. I moved toward Martha's grave, expecting emptiness, maybe a few pawprints dissolving into dew. Instead I stopped dead. A breath of wind, the hush of leaves, and the bear was there. She emerged from the tree line as if the forest itself handed her to the light. Head low, gait measured, something clamped gently between her jaws. My pulse kicked, I stepped behind a marker and watched. She carried a single bloom, white as new snow, 5 petals radiating from a sun-yellow center. A trillium, rare this late in October, plucked alive from shadowed woods where few dare tread. She padded to Martha's stone, paused, and with a tenderness no textbook grants her species, laid the flower across my wife's name. The stem quivered, then stilled. I could not move. Could not breathe. My mind tried to label what I was seeing, instinct, coincidence, misread gesture, but the words fell apart like ash in water. Only awe remained. She lifted her head and regarded the stone. A hush deeper than silence settled. I heard my own heartbeat like distant thunder, felt tears flood hot against the morning chill. I don't know if it's for her, I whispered, voice cracking, or for me. My knees buckled, I sank onto cold earth, palms pressed to wet grass. But thank you. The words cracked open something older than grief, and tears streamed unchecked. The bear turned those fathomless eyes on me, trusting, unhurried, almost gentle. Time compressed to the span of a single breath shared across species, across worlds. She wasn't just an animal. She was a living heart that still remembered Martha. And she had come to say goodbye. At that, she shifted her weight, muscles rolling beneath her coat. She walked past me, so close the scent of damp fur and crushed leaf filled my lungs, then headed toward the forest edge. There she paused, looked back once, a dark silhouette framed by sunlit haze, and disappeared among the maples. The spell broke, sound returned, the distant trill of a warbler, the creak of trees warming in first light. I knelt there, trembling, and traced the trillium's petals. They were cool, perfect, unbruised despite the journey in a predator's jaws. Footsteps crunched gravel behind me. I turned to see the ranger from the day before, rifle absent, hands empty. He'd come alone. I stood, wiping my face. He followed my gaze to the flower. "She brought that," I said. He studied me, then the stone, then the empty path. "No sign of her on the road in," he murmured. "She doesn't need roads." My voice shook with wonder, not fear. He crouched, touched the bloom like evidence from another universe. For a long moment he said nothing. Finally, "I've seen bears do strange things. But, not this." I tasted a shaky laugh. Martha believed animals feel more than we let ourselves imagine. I gestured at the trillium. Looks like she was right. The ranger exhaled, mist curling from his lips. "I'll file a report that the bear moved on. No relocation needed." He met my eyes. "You should still be careful." "I will," I promised, though careful seemed a pale word for whatever pact had just been sealed. He nodded and walked back to his truck, leaving the silence intact. I stayed, watching sunlight climb the stone until the trillium glowed like a small lantern. I didn't pick it up. It wasn't mine to keep. Instead I sat, breathing the crisp mountain air, feeling something settle in my chest, not closure, exactly, but a rearrangement, a rightness I hadn't known I was missing. The cemetery no longer felt like an ending, it felt like the place where two worlds touched hands and agreed to remember. Hours later I rose, brushed dew from my knees, and whispered goodbye, to Martha, to the bear, to the weight that had carried me here. I walked out beneath a sky suddenly vast and bright. I thought the story had traced its final circle, that nature had offered its last impossible gift and slipped back behind the veil. I thought nothing greater could follow a wild creature laying flowers for the dead. But wonder, it seems, breeds its own echoes, and the world was not finished teaching me how deep gratitude can cut, or how wide the bond between souls might stretch. Winter edged into the Blue Ridge one quiet breath at a time. Frost silvered the headstones most mornings, and the oaks rattled their bare limbs like old wind chimes. I found myself visiting the cemetery almost every day, not dragged by grief anymore, but drawn by something gentler, the way a tide returns to shore because it can't imagine staying away. The first time I went back after the trillium, I carried a small sack of apples. I set 3 beside Martha's marker, brushed away leaves just as the bear had, and sat a while. No huge shadow stirred from the forest, and that was all right. The ritual itself felt like a conversation. "Here, my love. Here, my friend." Days lengthened into a rhythm. I'd fill the bird feeder at dawn, drive the winding road, leave 2 or 3 apples, never more, never less, then linger in the hush. Sometimes deer stepped daintily among the graves. Sometimes a red fox trotted along the fence and vanished like a flame snuffed by daylight. Their presence felt like borrowed courage. Little by little, the ache inside me softened. I still missed Martha with a fierceness that caught me off guard in grocery aisles or half-heard songs, but the pain no longer gutted me. It sat beside me, companionable, the way an old scar hums in cold weather, not crippling, just alive. I understood now that grief could glow as well as cut. One afternoon in early December, snow threatened but never quite fell. I had just placed the apples when movement flickered at the forest edge. My breath hitched. There, half hidden among rhododendron shadows, stood the bear. Distance softened her outline, but I knew that shape, the slope of her shoulders, the copper streak under her eye. She watched me, motionless, as though weighing whether this reunion was necessary. A kernel of longing bloomed in my chest, fierce and bright, yet I didn't move toward her. Some meetings must stay spacious to remain sacred. I lifted a hand in silent greeting. She did nothing grand, no approach, no shared breath, no flower in her jaws. She merely held my gaze a few heartbeats, then turned, slipped between the trunks, and was gone. Snowflakes began to drift the moment she vanished, tiny white feathers settling on the apples, on the stone, on my upturned palm. And I, astonishingly, smiled. A real smile, full and unbroken, the first in a year. Not because the moment was miraculous, but because it felt perfectly enough. Sadness easing into peace, peace swelling into gratitude, gratitude unfolding into quiet. The world kept turning. I decorated the porch for Christmas. I mailed cards with shaky handwriting that read thinking of you, and okay. Nights were still lonely, but no longer hollow. I caught myself humming while making coffee. I answered phone calls without the dull dread of small talk. Martha's lavender sachet still perfumed her dresser drawer, and now the scent warmed me instead of lancing my heart. Every so often, I'd glance toward the forest on my walks and imagine a dark shape moving in the half-light, sharing the silence. Whether it was memory or presence hardly mattered, both felt like company. Winter thawed, rain polished the mountains green, and I planted 3 trillium bulbs behind the house. Maybe they'll bloom, maybe they won't, but I wanted the soil to remember her kindness. I believed the story had found its final note, a widower, a bear, an impossible exchange of mercy, each going back to their separate worlds changed but complete. I believed nothing more needed saying. I believed life had turned its face toward spring, and the last page lay still and peaceful. I thought it was over. I thought nature had offered me all the wonder it could muster, and that was blessing enough. But on the anniversary of Martha's passing, just when the dogwoods blushed pink and the trilliums should have still been deep beneath the earth, the mountains whispered one last secret, and everything I thought I understood tilted, bright and breathless, into a new light. The first anniversary of Martha's passing dawned clear and cold, the sky washed the color of old denim. I drove to the cemetery with a sprig of dried lavender tucked in my coat pocket and 3 fresh apples rolling in a paper bag on the seat beside me. My hands rested steady on the wheel, yet every mile deeper into the mountains felt like walking back into a dream I still wasn't sure had truly happened. At the gate, frost glittered on the iron like fine sugar. I paused before stepping through, listening. Nothing but the faint ticking of a winter wren somewhere in the brush. The hush seemed deeper than usual, as if the earth itself held its breath. The ground was firm underfoot, the grass brittle. When I reached Martha's stone, my heart hitched, a faint print pressed into the thin crust of ice, a half-moon pad, 5 gentle toe marks. A bear, or perhaps only a wandering dog, yet my pulse drummed louder for the possibility. I crouched and traced the outline with a gloved finger. The edges were crisp, not melted by the morning sun. Fresh. Could be any paw, I muttered, but the words rang hollow. I laid the apples and lavender at the base of the marker, brushed away a veil of pale oak leaves, and sat cross-legged in the cold. The hours drifted slow. I talked to Martha about the trivial things she once tended, how the winter birds favored black oil sunflower seeds, how the porch steps still creak on the third board. I told her I'd planted trillium bulbs even though I didn't know the first rule of gardening. I told her I was okay, mostly, and meant it. But each time the wind shifted I scanned the tree line, looking for a dark shape. Nothing moved. Noon leaned into dusk. Shadows lengthened, stretched, blurred the edges of granite and moss. My voice went quiet, the cold needled through my coat. The stillness grew so thick it felt like a wall pressing against my ribs. Finally, with the sun bleeding out behind the ridgeline, I rose, brushed frost from my knees, and whispered a farewell. Grief pricked but did not overwhelm, it felt now like a familiar hand on my shoulder. I started down the path toward the truck. That was when it came, one clear crack of a branch from the woods behind me. Not the careless snap of a squirrel, not the brittle tumble of deadfall. Something deliberate. I turned. Between two tall maples, half lost in gathering blue light, loomed the silhouette of a bear. Broad shoulders, lowered head, that gleam of cinnamon along one flank. She stood motionless, just watching. The distance and dusk made her seem half ghost, half guardian. My breath misted in front of me like a beacon, but I didn't move. I feared one step would shatter the fragile reality of her presence. I don't know if you're real, I said, voice raw in the quiet, or if grief has finally spun me a kinder illusion. But I see you. And I believe. For a heartbeat the mountains themselves seemed to lean closer. Then the bear dipped her head, slow, unmistakable, a gesture of acknowledgement. She turned, melted into the undergrowth, and was gone. No thrash, no rush, only the faint whisper of leaves settling into place. Silence flooded back, enormous and holy. My knees buckled, I gripped an old cedar trunk to stay upright. Tears blurred the world, but they were different now, clean, bright, almost sweet. For the first time since Martha's last breath, I felt utterly sure of something larger than pain, larger than memory, larger even than death. I swallowed the cold air, let it burn my lungs, and found myself laughing, quiet, reverent, disbelieving. Nature remembers. The creature remembers. And I will never be the same man again. She showed me we are not alone. Not ever. The cemetery seemed to exhale with me. A barn owl lifted off a nearby limb, wings silent as forgiveness. I watched it drift overhead and vanish into the deepening night. I walked back to the truck lighter than I'd been in years, a warmth uncurling in my chest that no winter chill could touch. The apples, the flower, the print in the frost, the unwavering eyes in the dusk, each was a stitch in a seam binding two worlds together. I slid behind the wheel, turned the key, and let the engine's hum echo the steady beat of renewed life in my veins. If your heart just tightened reading this, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here we share the true soul of nature. And if your heart is now brimful of reverence, write in the comments, nature is wiser than us.